This is the Living Vertizontal podcast, brought to you by The Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. We are a podcast that discusses the intersection of Scripture and our lives. Together, we continue the conversation that was started each preceding Sunday morning in our worship gathering.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are the Living Vertizontal podcast with you this week to continue our journey through this season of Lent together. As a quick reminder, last week we examined Jeremiah chapter 32, verses 26 through 41. And in this passage, we read a word from the Lord through Jeremiah, the prophet, concerning the unfaithfulness of the people of Israel as a result of their misplaced desires, really. Out of this passage, we address just how imperative it is that we have a properly placed desire for God. As our desire is refined for God through seasons like this, we find that obedience to God becomes simpler. Regardless of the reward, regardless of the difficulty, obedience becomes our default because our desire and focus is nothing else but God alone. This week, we are now in the fourth week following the fourth Sunday of Lent, and we are going to be working through Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 11 through 20. In this passage, we hear some of Moses' final words to the people of Israel as they prepare to enter the promised land. Natasha will be reading that passage for us in a moment, but I think instead of reading and then kind of having an intro conversation, it would be best to just introduce where this passage even fits kind of in the story. Because the nature of this Lent devotional and how we're moving around like different Psalms and different passages, like being in Jeremiah, being in Deuteronomy, being in Psalm, we don't really necessarily know what has come before and where we find ourselves. And so before we really read the passage, we think it's kind of important to know what's going on and what's eliciting these things that are going to be said by Moses. So really, the book of Deuteronomy as a whole is like Moses's final sermon to the people of Israel. They have journeyed through the wilderness for 40 years following their exile from Egypt. And interestingly, we talked about this on Sunday. It's not like the journey from Egypt to the border of the promised land was actually legitimately a 40-year walk. The people were wandering. There was a lot of refining that was taking place. We talked about how, this Lent season is 40 days, symbolic of the 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness being tempted, but also symbolic of the 40 years that the people of Israel spent wandering the wilderness, being refined and learning their dependence on God. And so the people of Israel have been wandering the wilderness. All of the people, well, almost all of them who left Egypt have died. And now this is just a new generation of Israelites who have come that are getting ready to receive this promised land. And so with that, we have this moment where in all of Deuteronomy, but also here in chapter 30 that we're going to be working with today, where Moses, who is not going to be able to enter the promised land because of momentary acts of disobedience, and God said, all right, because of that choice you made, you're going to not be entering. But so Moses is not entering. The people are getting ready to enter. And he's at this place where he's like, okay, I know that these are probably some of the last words that I'm going to be saying. And with it, I'm going to communicate some of the most important things that I could possibly communicate. The way we had talked about this on Sunday morning is, my relationship as a father to my children. If I know that this next conversation that I have with my children is going to be the last conversation that I get to have with them, I'm not going to simply request, hey, don't forget to put the milk away every time you pour a glass of milk. Like that's that doesn't really matter. That's
it's not the
inconsequential.
imparting wisdom you're going to provide.
Right. Yeah. It's not that final like oomph that I really hope that they remember me with. But I am going to point to the things that I think are the most important things that I could bring up. And maybe some of them in the moment, my kids would be like, I'm not really sure what to do with that. But in time, maybe they would understand, because I am teaching them, I am trying to communicate to them the most important things that I think I could communicate to them. Not necessarily for this moment, but for their life ahead. And that's exactly what Moses is doing here. He is using this opportunity to try and communicate the most important thing that he could communicate to them as they get ready to walk into this promise that they had. This promise that they have been waiting to inherit since, Abraham. Abraham received this promise really when God took him on a walk and said, look that way and look that way and look that way. And as far as your eye can see, this is going to be your place and this is going to be where your people are. And so this has been a long time promise that they have been waiting to receive. And they are here on the edge of receiving it. And these are the important words that Moses has to say. So with that, Natasha, will you read for us some of these words that Moses shares in his final message to the Israelites?
Yes. Deuteronomy 30, verse 11. Now what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven so that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
All right. Thank you for reading that for us today, Natasha. And so, with this context now and with this passage in mind, what are we seeing? What might be kind of a good place to start this conversation?
Yeah, so right from the beginning, as we jump into this passage, we get this feeling that there's a choice.
Yes.
There is either you choose the way of God, you choose life,
Yep.
you choose to live under his reign, under his rule as a part of his kingdom.
Under his lordship. Yeah.
Or you take an alternate path and you choose your own way. You choose to be Lord. You choose to be king. And that path leads to destruction, according to Moses here, according to the word given to him by God.
Right.
And so they have these choices set before them. And Moses is pleading with them. Choose life,
right.
Choose God. You have this set before you. And so as we're communicating this framework essentially of choice to the group of kids that we have in our church, we talked about this from the context of a plant. And plants receive the nutrients they need, both from the sunlight, right? And then also from water and some nutrients that they're going to take up from the soil. But as a whole, the plant itself is dependent on all of these different parts and dependent to remain rooted in the soil that it's planted in so that it continues to grow.
Yes.
And we talked about this, like as if the children were a plant, or as if the children were even a branch or a flower on that plant. And if you're to take scissors and you cut a beautiful flower off a plant, you can remove that flower and you're going to enjoy it for a little while. It'll look beautiful for a time. You can even place it in some water and you can, keep these, right?
Elongate it a little bit.
This is a thing that we do so that we can enjoy these beautiful flowers for longer. However, all of these flowers or branches that are removed, eventually they will die.
Right.
Because they're detached from their root. And so in their own right, they're incapable of maintaining life.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about this concept and how it kind of intersects and overlaps with this decision that we have to make of whether or not we are choosing to remain rooted in God's plan under God's lordship. Is that something we're choosing, or are we choosing to stand alone and apart? Mm-hmm. And while it might look beautiful for a time, for a season, eventually we know that this leads to destruction.
Right.
And so I think our lives, when we think about it, we have this choice before us. And we have to make this decision. Are we going to remain rooted in God's soil, which is good and nurturing and not always easy, right? Sometimes it's very hard. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it doesn't even look that beautiful.
Right.
But in the end, we know that this is life-giving. And so we remain because we know that God is life. Or you can make the opposite choice, which Moses is pleading with them. Please do not make this choice. We can choose to go our own way. We can choose to be set apart. And while our life might look beautiful for a time, eventually it leads to death and destruction.
Eventually it's going to be shown for what it is.
Yes. And apart from God, it's, there is nothing of longevity or worth or value. And you just said something about it being shown for what it is. And that made me think kind of another plant analogy, but it pertains so well to our life. So hold this passage in mind while I tell you this story about gardening, and then hopefully we'll be able to connect the dots.
The one story of gardening that we can share.
Yes, because there's not a lot. So in our yard, we have this ground cover that grows, and actually it's planted. Lennar, I think, loves this because they plant it everywhere in Riverstone.
It's probably cheap.
Yeah. So, but we have this ground cover, and it grows really well. It grows really fast. And so because of that, you're constantly having to edge or trim it to keep it maintained into the area you actually want it to be in, or I'm pretty sure it would take over the whole yard. It would
literally cover the ground, all of it.
So when we go to cut this, we trim it, and they have these kind of long branches that come off in all sorts of different directions. And so as you're trimming it, you're cutting it kind of like you would a bush, but there's pieces of it that are going to fall all around. And so then afterwards you go back and you try to pick up all the pieces that have been cut off.
Bush, yeah.
Right. And so, as we were doing this the other day, we're picking them all up, and I'm thinking I got them all. And a couple weeks later, I look outside and I notice, oh my goodness, it looks like this plant is dying. Yeah. What is going on? Oh my goodness, we must have cut too much off the resilient ground cover that I thought could never die. But as I go out there and I look closer, I'm realizing, no, these are the branches that have been cut off, that for a time were disguised in and amongst the other parts that were connected to the plant because they were near it, but not necessarily of it. They weren't attached to it. And so their nearness didn't allow them to continue to fool us for long. In a matter of weeks, they die.
Because they didn't remain connected to the root.
They meet their end. And then now we're stuck gathering up all these dead pieces that are now very obvious and easy to see by comparison to what we were trying to pick up a few weeks earlier. And I think about our life, and I think about how often, we think that, if I remain in close proximity to this plant, right? If I remain in close proximity to people who are connected to the good soil, to God, that will be sufficient to sustain my life. But the truth is, if we are not ourselves connected to God, right? We don't have
consistently
connected to God and remain, then eventually we, as you said, Nick, we will be exposed for what we are. Mm-hmm. We're dead. We're dying, and we are not going to fool anybody in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this kind of speaks to that like idea that I've heard a lot where people are like, yeah, but like you don't have to be a Christian to do good things. And that's totally true. Like you don't have to be connected to the plant to still have green on your leaves. But in time, it's going to be exposed for what it truly is. And just because we don't have to be a Christian to do good things doesn't mean that in time, like we are not going to be kind of exposed for who we are. And it's going to be shown that, maybe that goodness only goes so far. Maybe I can't continue to sustain this level of self-giving because I don't have the God of creation pouring into me. And so now I'm starting to develop bitterness. I'm starting to develop animosity towards the others that are just constantly taking from me. And because I don't have the God of creation pouring into me, I run dry and I become exposed. Even though for a long time it maybe looked really good, eventually it's going to run out.
And so to sum up, like our whole conversation kind of with the kids, we really talked about the importance of remaining connected to Christ, remaining connected to the giver of life. And what that looks like for us is to be listening, continually listening. And if you look at this passage, it really is, it's all about remaining faithful to listen and be led by God himself, who desperately wants us to walk in his way, not because he wants his way, but because he knows that it is the way that is truly life-giving. Right. And that's going to be best for us in the end.
Yeah, the verse towards the end of our passage, it's like the second half of verse 19 and then into verse 20. It says, now choose life, right? So again, Moses is kind of presenting before them, you have a choice to make. You can either choose life or you can choose death. There's no middle ground. You can't be in between. You can't just kind of sit in limbo. You can't jump in and out of camps. Well, I mean, I guess you can, but ultimately, like, you've got to make a choice, and wherever you've ended up is going to be exposed, right? And he is pleading for them, choose life. And so in verse 19, now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. Like, again, this kind of just reiterates what you were just sharing, Natasha, this idea of how important it is for us to be listening. The people of Israel, who are sitting on the edge of inheriting the promised land, they have been wandering the wilderness. They have been refined in this understanding of how important it is for them to depend on God in everything. They have been dependent on him for water, even in their grumbling. They have been dependent on him for food, even in their grumbling. They have even been dependent on them for their clothing to be sufficient on the journey. Like it scripturally, it tells us that their sandals did not wear out. It's not because they had gotten the finest Egyptian leather that Egypt had to offer. It's because God was sustaining them. And so the people of Israel have gone through this refining wilderness where they have recognized the depth of their dependence. And Moses, in his final words to them, is saying, you're getting ready to go into the promised land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's spigots with milk and honey that are shooting everywhere. It means that this is a land that is lush with produce. This is a land that has the ability to sustain so much livestock. You guys are getting ready to walk into a place of abundance. Please do not forget who you're actually dependent on in all of this, though. Don't think for a second that as you walk into this place, all of a sudden now you can set aside the dependence that you have learned over these last 40 years because now you've arrived at the promise. Even as you walk into this promise, it is not a place. The promise is a person. You have come to recognize the depth of your dependence. That is a hard work to get to. Don't let it go. Continue to love him. Continue to listen to him and continue to hold fast to him. Don't go your own way. Don't think that you got it from here. Don't think that all of a sudden the political alliances around you are going to be more dependable than your God. Choose life. Choose him. Be dependent. You've learned it. Don't forget it. And I mean, I could understand why this would be Moses' message. If he's saying this is the last message I'm going to get to share with you guys, like this really is foundational. Us as a local church, this is this message that Moses is preaching to the Israelites is a message that is kind of in the foundation of who we are and what we're trying to always remind ourselves of, and what we're trying to grow in recognition of, this idea of we are dependent on God, and that in every moment we need to be listening for him. We need to train ourselves to recognize his voice, so that in the heat of a moment, when we have a choice to make, right, when we can either choose life or choose death, in the words that we're about to say to somebody that we're talking to, we can hear his voice and remember what it and know what it sounds like to choose life in that moment, instead of just whatever comes out of us because we're frustrated. This is an important message. Moses thinks it. We believe it at the core of who we are as a local church. And I guess if I were to be like imparting final words for anybody that would be listening to this, I would say the same thing. Like, the most important thing that you can do with your life is make the choice to love God, to listen to him, and to hold fast to him, period.
Yeah, I think about this in terms of the seasons of our life. And when we're in wilderness, right, when things are really difficult and challenging, it exposes our need for him to such a high extent, because we can't control anything, right? Things are so out of our control that our only hope in desperation is to go to God and say, God, please help. God, please fix this. God, I need you, right? And then it's in the moments where things start to go well for us, right? Where we start to have some more control over the things in our life, where it feels like this perception of control, right? Now I don't need to cry out to God in my desperation any longer, because, I don't really need him for this.
I'm not as desperate.
And I think that temptation, this never goes away, right? It never goes away. And this is that conversation of remaining planted in his good soil.
Yes.
And I think that especially in our times of promised land, right? Especially when we're walking in the victorious living that Jesus offers in certain seasons of our lives, all the more we have to fight and battle to remain dependent on him. See what he's doing in my day-to-day. As my day is going so well, hunt for the God, hunt for the good, right? Find the places where Jesus is at work in my life, so I remember, that good thing happened, but that was because God did this.
And bring him the honor and glory and praise that he deserves.
Right. And it holds us in that state of dependence on him, so that we never turn into one of those hidden dead branches in my backyard, because we are constantly connected. And there's no need for disguise, because we really are truly rooted in him, and we are for him, and we are living with him and ready to serve him.
That's so good. And so another thing, this maybe is kind of like shifting gears a little bit, but not necessarily. Something that really stuck out to me in this passage was the statement that Moses makes in verse 11. So the first verse that we read of our passage. Now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. So then it made me, I underlined that the first time I read it. I was like, okay, so what are you commanding? So then I go down in verse 16. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. This is the command that Moses is issuing to them. And he says about that command, it's not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. And then he goes even further and says, you don't need to have somebody to ascend up into heaven to get this for you. You don't need somebody who has the ability to reach across the seas and bring back this special revelation. You people of Israel, have it in you to accomplish this command. I was completely floored as I read this statement, Because in my mind, I had always, the truth of the statement, I agree with 100% wholeheartedly, but I agree with it on this side of the cross. At least that's what I had always thought. Because like I read in the New Testament in multiple places to be holy as he is holy. I read to live as Jesus lived. Like if we're going to call ourselves Christians, then we ought to be able to live as Jesus lived. And then we look at the Gospels. Well, how did Jesus live? Jesus lived fully dependent on his Father, never saying or doing anything apart from what he saw his Father saying and doing. So I see this all throughout the New Testament. I see this thread woven there and the invitation and the expectation that it is possible, because as Jesus ascends into heaven, he says, I will never leave you or forsake you. So he is with us, right? So it's not too difficult for us to do those things. At least it shouldn't be too difficult for us to do those things. It shouldn't be impossible. If it's impossible, then man, our God is not necessarily a good God for him to have expectations of us that are impossible for us with him to live into. I believe we have a good God. I do not believe that this request to be holy as he is holy, this invitation to live as Jesus lived, which is fully dependent on the Father in everything that he does, I believe this is something that is possible. Not on our own, right? But as we remain rooted in him, like you were sharing with us. As we recognize our dependence on the Spirit, as we recognize the sound of his voice and begin to listen more and begin to depend more, these are things that are possible. That said, I always thought that was more like a New Testament promise, not something that I would find myself reading in the first 5 books of the Bible. But then as I think about it, even back in Exodus, the invitation, this whole covenant that God made with the people of Israel was that they would be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation to be a blessing to the rest of the world. This was always their purpose from the beginning. And again, I don't believe that we serve a God who tries to call us to do things that he's not making the way to accomplish. And here in Deuteronomy, with Moses' words, we see that exact thing explicitly communicated. So we have, it's not too difficult. We have that the command is to love the Lord your God, walk in obedience to him, and keep his commands, decrees, and laws. This is why it's not impossible. Because, verse 14, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. Moses helps the people of Israel understand this is not something that you accomplish in your own right. Now, if I'm going to tell you, if I'm going to command you to love the Lord your God, to walk in perfect obedience, and to obey all of his laws and commands and decrees on your own right, then it probably is beyond your reach. It probably is too difficult for you to do. You probably should have somebody who goes up into heaven to try to bring a special revelation down to you like I have, or have somebody who can reach across the sea to do something magnificent to bring you back an understanding of how you ought to live. You probably do need that. But you don't need it because it's written on your hearts. It's in your mouth. There is so much hope, and in my mind, there is so much excitement that I get when I recognize that, because it really is simple. It's not easy. I don't want to say it's easy. There is a difference between those words, but it really is simple. This life that Moses is calling the Israelites to live, the life that we have been invited to live in Christ through the power of the Holy Spirit today, not some time in the future when we experience glorification, but even today. It's not impossible because he is with us. And as we remain rooted in the reality that he is with us, and as we grow more aware of his presence with us and more perceptive of the words that he speaks to us, we begin to find that, oh, this command is not too difficult for us to live into. It's simple.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about, well, in our church context, we talk a lot about holding every thought captive, and taking every thought to Jesus. This podcast is named Living Vertizonal, and the whole concept.
What is living vertizonal?
Yeah, so the whole concept behind this vertizonal living is that everything that is lived horizontally and vertically at the same time. So anything that comes out of my mouth does not do so until I have taken that thought captive, held it vertically with Christ, and gotten his blessing to say,
Right.
yes, that is what I would say. That would be my response.
That's a representation of my kingdom.
Right. You as my mouthpiece, you say this. And then similarly, right, when people say things into us, right, when we're doing this horizontal living with people around us and they speak something to us, we immediately take that thought, right, that word, and we take it to Jesus and say, Jesus, is this your thought? And we test everything. And this requires us to really slow down
A lot.
Right? To think very, very carefully about every word that comes out of our mouths, about every word that we allow to come into our ears, right? Yeah. We have to, as Christians, we have to have this discipline of taking everything to Jesus and say, Jesus, is this thought, is this idea, is this word, is this yours?
Right.
If the answer is yes, then let's lean into it and let's live into that. And that is obedience.
Choice of life.
If it is no, then we've got to refrain. We have to have the self-discipline to say, okay, Jesus, I really want to say this right now, but not my will, your will.
Right.
And so this, when you talk about it being simple, but not easy. It really is. It's a matter of taking these thoughts captive before Jesus, asking him what to say at each moment, asking him what to do at each moment. Jesus, how would you respond in this situation? Jesus, what would you say? And not just the hard situations, right? We're dependent always, even in the easy situations. Jesus, how do I respond here?
Exactly.
And as we do that, the world will start to look like his kingdom.
Yes.
And we aren't going to do it perfectly every time. Jesus provides grace for that. But I think what he does is when we recognize, oh man, I missed that. Jesus, I didn't take that one to you. It blurted out and that wasn't you. Jesus, I'm so sorry. I think he dusts us off and he says, it's okay. We'll get the next one. We got the next one, and it's this constant relationship where we're becoming so aware of his spirit and presence with us and within us that we are completely given over to everything that is his, so that we, like Jesus, never do or say anything apart from the Father.
Yeah, that really is kind of the heart of this conversation. And there's such good truth in what you were just sharing with us. I think as we kind of take a step back from everything we've been talking about and we start to look at it and we recognize the season that we're in and we hear what Moses is saying to us as the people today, it seems like maybe in this moment we're being invited into the opportunity to slow down. Maybe this season, while often Lent is associated with like fasting of some sort or giving something up, maybe in this season, we're being asked to develop a new practice of slowing down, whereby when somebody speaks to us, rather than in our minds working to game plan, because this is what I'm guilty of, so I'm not necessarily reading this on anybody else, this is what I do, rather than immediately in our minds beginning to game plan how I'm going to respond to it, maybe we need to listen well to them and be listening well to Jesus, who is listening to them, and then say, okay, Lord, here are my thoughts. How do I respond? Perhaps the invitation this season is an invitation to slow down, permission to slow down even, and to recognize just how deep our dependence is in our interactions with others, in our moments where we have the choice to make. And so maybe we can use this Lent season as a springboard to, if we haven't already been, to initiate a new practice in our life, a practice of the permission to slow down when a choice presents itself. So maybe that's what we need to start. Like, let's start small, right? to think about that and say, well, this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life, that becomes overwhelming, especially if it's not something that I'm doing on a regular basis. And honestly, even if it is something that I'm doing, it becomes overwhelming when I think about, man, I got to do this for my life. But let's make this the commitment this next week. Let's work to slow down this next week. Need it smaller? Today. Let's work to slow down today. Need it a little smaller? One choice that you have today. The next choice you have. Make a commitment to slow down. And let's start a new practice of dependence on Him in everything we do.
As you journey with us through this Lenten season, we recommend purchasing A Consuming Fire, a Lenten devotional, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizontal podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.